What's the moment a mother realizes her sister had been preparing to take her son months before she ever got sick? My sister Vanessa had been planning to keep my son Eli for months before the night they wheeled me into surgery. While I was in a medically induced coma with a tube down my throat and a machine breathing for me, Vanessa was repainting her spare bedroom a soft blue and telling everyone on her street that her little boy was finally coming home. She had enrolled Eli in the elementary school 2 blocks from her house, writing on the registration forms that she was his legal mother. She had bought him a wardrobe of new clothes, a new backpack, a bedspread covered in rockets. She had told her neighbors a story about a custody arrangement that did not exist, about a sick sister who had finally agreed to do the right thing. None of this had started with my collapse. It had started 7 months before, on Eli's 5th birthday, in whispers I never heard. The night it happened, I was standing in my own kitchen washing a single coffee mug. A blood clot the size of a thumb broke loose in my left leg, traveled up through my body, and lodged in my lungs. And a few seconds later, my heart simply stopped. I had enough time, in the strange, clear seconds before I lost consciousness, to pull my phone from my back pocket and call the one person in the world I trusted most. I called my sister. The recording the paramedics later pulled from her voicemail has me saying, in a voice I do not recognize, "Can you get Eli? Something is wrong with me. Just for a couple of days, please." Then nothing. The paramedics restarted my heart twice, once in my living room, once in the back of the ambulance. By the time they got me into surgery, my brain had gone without oxygen long enough that the doctors put me under and kept me under for 2 full weeks. 2 weeks of my life. I have no memory of the 2 weeks in which Vanessa stepped into the empty space. Not as a guardian, not as a relative doing a hard favor, but as a woman who had been waiting a long time for exactly this kind of door to open. To understand what she did, you have to understand what happened to her 3 years before any of this. She had a son of her own. His name was Caleb. He died at 4 months old in his crib on an ordinary afternoon, and no doctor could ever give her a reason. One of those losses with no villain and no cause and no place to put the grief. Vanessa did not survive it the way people are supposed to. She kept Caleb's nursery exactly as it had been, the mobile still turning, the tiny clothes still folded in the drawers for 3 years. She stopped coming to family dinners, and somewhere in that long, airless grief, something in my sister curdled. She began talking about Eli more and more, holding him a little too long, calling him sweet boy in a voice that was a little too soft. She started offering to babysit constantly. I was a single mother working double shifts at a distribution warehouse, and a sister who wanted to watch my son for free so I could pick up overtime felt, at the time, like the one piece of good luck I had. I was grateful. I told everyone how lucky I was to have her. I did not know that every afternoon she spent alone with my son, she was not babysitting. She was rehearsing. On the first night, while I was being put under, Vanessa drove to my apartment with a duffel bag and packed up Eli's things. His clothes, his toothbrush, the small stuffed triceratops he could not sleep without. She did not pack the photographs of him and me. She left those in the drawer. She took him to her house and told him this was his real home now, that the apartment had only ever been temporary. Over those 2 weeks, she remade my son into someone else's. She threw away the clothes she had packed and bought all new ones. When Eli asked where his dinosaur shirt was, she told him it was a sick shirt from his sick old life, and they had thrown the sick away. She told him to call her mom. She told him I was Aunt Renee, that I had become so ill I could no longer take care of a little boy, that I had decided it was better for him to have a mom and a dad who would never get sick and never leave. She told the neighbors he was her son. She enrolled him at the school down the street, signing forms as his mother. Then, near the end of the 2nd week, she hired a photographer. She dressed Curtis and Eli and herself in matching white shirts and took family portraits in front of a tree. She had the largest one printed and framed. She hung it over her fireplace in the exact spot where a photograph of Caleb had hung for 3 years. She took her dead son down and put my living one up in his place. When I finally surfaced from the dark, weak and confused, the first word out of my mouth was Eli's name. The nurses told me he was safe, that my sister had him, that everyone had been so grateful Vanessa had stepped in. I was too weak to understand the look that passed between 2 of them when they said it. Soon kept not arriving. Every excuse was reasonable on its own. Stacked together, they built a wall. A week after discharge, I stopped asking. I called a car and went to my sister's house to bring my son home myself. Vanessa opened the door and stood in the gap with one hand on the frame, her body angled to block any view inside. She was not surprised to see me. "He's finally adjusted," she said before I could speak. "He has a routine. He has a school. He sleeps through the night. Pulling him out of all of that just because you feel guilty for almost dying would damage him. And I am not going to let you damage my son to make yourself feel better. My son." She said it without flinching. I told her to move. That was when Curtis appeared behind her looking at the floorboards. and Vanessa produced a folder thick with paper. The readiness of it, the way it was already in her hand, told me everything. "We have documented all of it," she said. 2 weeks of full-time care, 3 pediatrician appointments, school enrollment, a bedtime routine. Any judge would look at this folder and then, look at you. A single mother working double shifts who just had her heart stop in her own kitchen and have no trouble seeing who the real parent is. So I stood on my sister's porch with my heart still healing inside my chest. And I called the police. The officer who came heard the words "child and will not give him back," and everything about his posture changed. When Vanessa said my collapse constituted abandonment and produced a notarized guardianship form signed in my name, the officer looked at it. At the bottom was my signature, a signature I had never written, dated to a day I had spent on my back in an intensive care unit, sedated past the point of dreaming. She had forged my name. She had dated the forgery to a day she knew I was unconscious because she had been calling the hospital to ask how long I would stay that way, and she had found someone to notarize it. The social worker, Ms. Delgado, arrived within the hour. She was a small woman with the kind of eyes that have watched every type of liar a family can produce and stopped being surprised by any of them. She looked at the folder, then at me, then at Vanessa, taking the measure of all three in about 4 seconds. The notary whose commission was revoked 8 months ago for repeatedly stamping fraudulent documents, Ms. Delgado said, the one currently subject to an open criminal investigation. "Is that the notary whose stamp is on this form?" The color went out of Vanessa's face the way water goes out of a sink. Ms. Delgado began photographing every page in the folder while she spoke quietly into a recorder, noting the date, the address, the name of each person on the porch. And Vanessa, who still did not understand what was happening to her, kept saying things worth writing down. Every sentence about being the real mother now, about having earned him with 2 weeks of love, about my claim expiring the moment I let myself get sick, was another stone she was stacking against her own future. Inside the house, Ms. Delgado sat Eli in a chair by the window and asked him soft, simple questions. Where had he been sleeping? What had Mom Vanessa told him about his mommy? Had anyone made him keep secrets? At the word secret, my son went quiet in a way that scared me more than his crying had. Then, in a voice so small I had to hold my breath to catch it, Eli told her about the secret. He said Mom Vanessa had told him a secret a long time ago, way before I got sick, way before he was dropped off. When she used to babysit him, just the two of them, she would tell him she was his real mommy and that I was only borrowing him for a little while. That one day he would come live with her for real and it would be the best day ever. He said she told him it had to stay their secret. That if he ever told me, I would get angry and might send him away early. So he never told. He had been carrying it by himself, a 5-year-old holding a secret that big. For 7 months. Ms. Delgado's pen stopped moving on the page. Eli was buckled into her car. On the drive home, he told me Mom Vanessa said I had gotten sick on purpose to give him away, that she had thrown out his dinosaur shirt because it was a sick boy shirt, and as he said each thing, the rage rose in my chest, slow and enormous, because I understood that she had not simply taken his body for 14 days. She had spent those 14 days taking my son apart and rebuilding him with herself at the center. And then a cold thought arrived underneath the rage. No one could do that much damage to a child in 2 weeks unless the foundation had been laid long before. Vanessa was arrested that afternoon, still insisting, as the officer read her rights, that she was Eli's real mother now, that 2 weeks of devotion meant something, that 7 months of love meant something, that any decent human being would understand a grieving woman trying to save a child the universe should have given her in the first place. The car pulled away. She was still screaming. My lawyer, Russ Cardoza, when he read the complete picture, said the forged guardianship, which Vanessa clearly thought was her strongest weapon, was in fact the best thing that could have happened to my case. It transformed the story from a sympathetic relative who got attached into a person who had committed a calculated, premeditated crime. Then the police finished pulling Vanessa's internet search history. The searches went back 4 months before the night my heart stopped. Emergency custody laws. How to prove a parent unfit. How long before temporary guardianship becomes permanent. What happens to a child if a single parent dies with no will? She had searched all of it methodically from her home, computer in the evenings, while I thanked her at every family gathering for being such a generous aunt. The investigators also pulled her purchase history. Weeks before I ever got sick, before there was any emergency at all, Vanessa had bought a child-sized bed frame, a set of school enrollment forms, and a booster seat for her car. She had been furnishing the room and assembling the paperwork for a child she had no custody of, no legal claim to, and no emergency to justify, weeks in advance. The way a person prepares a nursery before a baby arrives. The babysitting. All those generous afternoons, it had been rehearsal. At trial, Russ laid the timeline in front of the jury like a wall of evidence. The birthday, the secret, the 4 months of searches, the bed frame bought in advance, the forged form dated to my coma, the card mailed to my son telling a 5-year-old to remember their special secret, and the attempt to collect him from daycare while a restraining order was being prepared. The prosecutor also called Curtis to the stand. He was thinner than I remembered, his suit hanging loose off his shoulders. He said that over the last year, Vanessa had begun talking about Eli constantly in a way that had frightened him, saying things like he should have been ours, saying the universe had taken their son and left me with one I could barely afford, saying it wasn't fair. Then the prosecutor asked him about the night I called from the ambulance. Curtis looked down at his hands for a long moment. Then he said that when my call came in, Vanessa had listened, hung up, and turned to him with a look he had never seen before, and said 4 words, "This is finally our chance." He said he had known, somewhere in himself, that what they were doing was wrong, and that he would carry for the rest of his life the fact that he had not stopped it. As he spoke, I watched my sister's composure finally come apart. The careful stillness she had held for 2.5 days cracked down the middle, and the tears came without her permission. For the first time, she was not the woman arriving to chair a meeting. She was just a person watching her own husband tell a room full of strangers the truth she had spent months refusing to hear. The jury was out less than 3 hours. Guilty. At the final custody hearing months later, the judge set down his pen and looked at me. He said I had carried an impossible thing with a steadiness he did not see often from that bench, that I had put my son's healing ahead of my own anger at every turn, that this court found no question whatsoever, none about my fitness as a mother. Then he terminated any and all custody claims from Vanessa permanently. Sole legal guardian, full parental rights, restraining order until Eli turns 18, no contact without explicit court approval, which he considered extremely unlikely ever to be granted. Delia was waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps with Eli, who was sitting on the cold stone swinging his legs and working his way through a juice box. The second he saw me, he dropped it, jumped up, and ran the whole way, and asked whether my long grown-up meeting was finally done, because Ren had promised him pancakes were allowed if I said okay. I bent down and picked him up. He was heavy and warm and completely unbothered, a 5-year-old who had already moved on to thinking about syrup, who had no idea what had just been decided about the entire shape of his life in the room behind me. I held him against the place in my chest where my heart had once stopped. I told him yes. Pancakes were absolutely, definitely allowed.